Welcome. We're so glad to see you here for this event. As you start to enter the room, please put your school or where you're calling from into the chat, which is fully operational throughout this whole webinar. Love to hear from where you're coming from and kind of call that out as we get started here. My name is Peter Blair, and I'm the director of the Augustine Collective, as well as Veritas Institute at the Veritas Forum. As you know, this is a webinar on cultivating a diverse audience, which is co-sponsored by the Veritas Institute and by Plough Quarterly. As the director of Institute, I just wanted to say welcome and express our gratitude to Plough for being such a great partner in this event and more broadly. Plough has been involved in a lot of things across Veritas's work. They've hosted some Augustine Collective journals on the Fox Hill property, which has been a great time for those journals. They've had some of our students have been involved in internships in the summer, which we'll be hearing more about at the end of the webinar. And they've also been involved in providing writing coaching at Veritas Weekend and Veritas Institute. So we're really grateful for their partnership and for all that they do to kind of support this work. So thanks. As I said earlier, as you're coming in, feel free to put in where you're calling from or what school you attend, so we can kind of call that out here as we get started. I'll be handing it over to my colleague Mariah Hawkins in a second to introduce the event and the panelists and the structure for the evening. Before I do, I just wanted to do a quick plug for Veritas Institute for our summer program itself. As some of you may know, Veritas Institute is a week-long in-depth formation program in thought leadership for a selective cohort of students. That happens every June in Washington, D.C. that we run through the Veritas Forum. This year, it'll take place from June 5th to June 10th. Over the course of the week, students will hear from world-class speakers, get feedback from professional editors on their own writing projects. In the past, we've also had a Plough editor, Katherine Kuiper, as one of our writing coaches. So hopefully she'll be here this summer as well to do that with y'all. You'll also refine your writing craft, learn about different professional pathways for thought leadership after college, and explore DC with a like-minded cohort of peers. The theme this year is there such a thing as the good life? I will drop a link into the chat, which features the schedule and speakers from last year's Summer Institute. This will give you a good sense of what to expect for this coming summer. We haven't opened applications yet, but we hope to do so soon. If you would like priority access to the application, please drop us an email at augustine@veritas.org. I will drop that link into the chat as well. You can also email us at that address for any questions you have about the Institute or about Veritas and the Augustine Collective more broadly. We really hope you will consider applying to Institute. As past attendees have noted, it really is an incredible experience. It's even been called life-changing, so you really don't want to miss it. And we hope that you will consider applying. And please continue to drop into chat where you're calling from as we get started here. And with that, I will hand it over to Mariah, who will introduce the event and the panelists.
Thanks, Peter, and hi, everyone. As Peter said, my name is Mariah Hawkins, and I'm the program manager of the Augustine Collective. Tonight, we will be hearing from the four people on screen with me here. First, we will have Peter Mommsen. Peter serves as the editor-in-chief of Plough. We have Susannah Black Roberts. She is a senior editor at Plough. We have Trevor Wiser, who is a marketing director for Plough. And finally, we have Drew Whitley, who is a senior at Dartmouth College and the editor-in-chief emeritus of the Dartmouth Apologia. Before we begin, I would like to reiterate the structure for the event. So first, we will hear from Susannah, Peter, and Trevor about their perspectives on running a magazine and cultivating an audience. Then current AC student Drew Whitley will react to their presentations, offer some insights from an AC perspective, and potentially ask them a few questions from an AC perspective. I will then take over and ask the panel a few questions before we turn things over to audience Q&A. So please do be brainstorming now your questions for the panel, and don't be shy. You can drop those into the Q&A section, and we will call on you when the time comes and promote you on screen. If you would like to ask a question without being called on, feel free to include your question in the Q&A and then just add a note like text only. I can go ahead and read those questions off when they come up. One final note, I believe, is that the webinar is being recorded, so just be mindful of that. And let's get started. I think we have Susannah first.
Hey, everyone. I am calling in from the UK where it's midnight. And that is how much I care about student journalism and excellence in publishing. It's really good to be here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it takes to build a network of writers. And there are kind of a variety of angles that you can go at this from. The first thing I would say is that you're going to be wanting to read the kinds of things that you want to publish. So and read the best. So read widely, read other magazines, read people who are just starting out, and read kind of old or veteran writers whose style and ideas are going to be influential. Um, and then, I mean, obviously, social media is a huge factor in terms of just getting to know people. A lot of pitches come to me over Twitter. A lot of pitches, well, not so much over Facebook because Facebook is horrific, and I've ignored it for a while. But a main sort of thing that I advise is just be in conversations with people who are the kinds of people who you want to write for you. And out of those conversations, a lot of pitches are going to come. One of the things that we emphasize a great deal at Plough is in-person sort of fellowship. So we've done in the past writers' weekends at Fox Hill, which is where Plough's offices are. We just basically it's a gathering of people who are the current essentially crop of writers, or people who we want to write for us, or people who aren't necessarily writers, but we think are kind of interesting and should be part of the conversation. And that's just been really valuable. Those people are asking us when we're going to have the next one of those, which we will. We also have quarterly launches for the magazine, both in the US and in New York, and in either London or Oxford or Cambridge. And again, those are very frequently, we'll have someone who's written a piece for the magazine as a speaker. As frequently as possible, we'll have more than one. And again, the conversations that we get up to in those, in person in those events, very frequently pieces will come out of that. So, I mean, I guess this is possibly obvious, but like, the reason that you're going to want to publish something is because it's interesting. And the way that you find out what people are interested in is by being part of an ongoing conversation, and figuring out what topics, and then also, who the people are who could address those topics the best. We'd be happy to sort of talk to you about like the logistics of that, but I kind of think I'm going to wrap up for now. Conversation, including social media, reading widely, and doing some kind of in-person events are kind of the three things that I would advise if you're looking to start up your own network of writers. And obviously that will apply very differently when you're on campus. It'll be a lot easier in a lot of ways, but that's what we do, and it's worked very well.
Thanks, Susannah. I think Peter's up next.
So I'm just going to add right on to what Susannah was saying. First of all, as a magazine that's been publishing off and on for over 100 years, we feel like we're absolutely in the same boat as many of you in the Augustine Collective associated with the Veritas Forum. So we're coming from a Christian background, and we're trying to, in the words of our founding editor, apply Christianity publicly. And that really gets to the heart of what we're talking tonight is diversity of audience, diversity of contributors. What is it that we need to say to apply Christianity publicly in a way that our peers can hear us? And so I'm just going to offer a few quick thoughts at the beginning, knowing that we can get into any of these topics a little bit later. First, a kind of word of warning. Our biggest enemy in conceptualizing new issues of the magazine, or thinking of articles that we'd like to commission, is the we. Who is that we? That always needs to be interrogated. If we want to talk to a wide variety of people, and also include as many people as possible in a magazine that fulfills our mission, we need to always be aware of the readers and the contributors who don't agree with us on many things, but with whom we may share important common ground. It was interesting to hear Peter mention the theme of the Veritas Forum's Augustine Collective's seminar next year, which is on the good life. That really is some of those big issues that the gospel ultimately has answers to, but we find we get the best writing and the best publishing from if we approach from basically a neutral point of view. So what is that good life? How do we live well together? What gives life purpose and meaning? These are things that anyone on campus or beyond it who's kind of thinking about the things that we care about are asking. And then we look for topics that will speak to that in a way that people can hear. So a lot of that has to do with the writers that you have available. And I think there's a kind of taxonomy of writers, just to add on to what Susannah was saying. There's people who are eminent in their fields. So they may be academics or church leaders, theologians, others that you may have access to. There's people who you just know are really good at writing, that always deliver good stuff. And then most exciting, but also most time consuming, are the people who aren't already established writers, but may have something unique to say. And you may find that you're better off interviewing them because they might not deliver a great draft to you. But that is something I would strongly commend to you. Some of the issues that we find then looking at, we're just putting a new issue together now. It's on generations. So it's on the search for roots, essentially. What does it mean for the old to be connected to the young? What is our relationship with the past? That's a big issue that has a specifically Christian answer, but is certainly not limited in whom can contribute or who might be interested in it. Other issues we've done recently are things like beyond capitalism, where we talk about economics, or disability, a huge topic that has obvious overlap. If you think of all Pope Francis has had to say the last few years about throwaway culture and people with disabilities. Other topics might be something really just fun, like music or art, reading. So think of those big topics. Be aware of that, the enemy of the we, and then try to speak in a way that looks at the most urgent problems that are on people's minds, and offer some type of answer to them. And in that way, even just as an editor going through, I always am beware of that word we. I'm going to harp on this a little bit because the assumptions behind that are often the problem with a piece. And just be as kind of broad-minded as possible in what you consume. So there's a wide variety of magazines I stay in touch with, everything from Christian publications like First Things or Christianity Today, to leftist ones like The Drift, to more philosophical ones like our friends at The Point and Harper's and The Atlantic. Just to kind of be aware of what's in the air. And then think, what can we uniquely have to say about this? Possibly in a way that, you can also be a little bit pragmatic, almost opportunistic about it. What are the things that people want to have conversations about? And then aim to address those things. So in terms of finding writers for that, then, I think each publication kind of has their own criteria for what kind of person they're going to give a platform to. My personal take on it is we're best off owning who we are, never sort of hiding the flag that we sail under. But on the other hand, looking kind of actively for people who are kind of on the edges, with whom we share common ground on maybe just one or two particular issues, but who have something valuable to say. And then making sure that somewhere in the issue then too you have the robust theological and intellectual connections to the faith, so that you don't kind of drift off course. So those are just a few thoughts on how to conceptualize an issue and what kind of contributors to get. I think it's always a matter of getting a mix. And then finally, my final point will be, don't forget the power that you have as journalists to reach even very big name people who you might not think you will be able to get. And there, the interview is your friend. There's very few people who will not give a student journalist an interview. And I was just talking, and this is not with a Christian affiliated publication, a new literary review launching out of Budapest, and had a great lunch with them last week. They managed to get everyone from Marianne Williamson, who was temporarily famous on the political scene, to Noam Chomsky, the linguist and leftist, to a bunch of other people, Slavoj Žižek, and the socialist. Try to just kind of think outside the box, score some big interviews. It'll help your publication, and what you'll do then too, by getting a few big names in every issue, if you can, is you'll be elevating the voices that you really care about, the people who really have something to say, maybe people who are doing something on the ground that is absolutely fascinating, the pieces from people who, again, may not be famous or well-credentialed, but may have great insights into a topic of pressing concern. So those are a few kind of introductory thoughts that I'd be happy to get into some more, but I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Thanks, Peter. Trevor, I think is up.
Yeah, this has been really interesting already, and I'm looking forward to hearing Drew, reflect on some of these tactics and ideas. But I think, just to say, one of the kind of incentives for this evening came from when we hosted the Cornell Claritas Journal here a few weeks ago, and they were telling us about how the feeling of getting an issue off to the printer and feeling like we're done now, or that this is sort of, phew, the work is done, now we can stop. And we thought about that quite a bit, and we're actually right. We're right at that point now. We're with our next issue. It goes to the printer tomorrow, I think, if all goes well. But we really, we really see that as one of an ongoing series of events. And Susannah was speaking earlier about the importance of events and physical, physical or virtual gatherings to identify, your new readers, your new writers. And so we see our audience as a community, as a network, an ongoing conversation. And our goal is that the arrival of a new issue, be that the physical thing in your mailbox or when you can see it online, that moment is an event. It's an exciting occurrence. It's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking about in advance. So, all through the process, even like often as we're pitching or working on articles, editors will be, tweeting about what they're working on and things they're encountering. We'll let our readers know by email and by social when an issue is going off to press, so they know along with us this thing is coming. And then we make a really big deal in every way that we can on that day and that week when it's now available. And we kind of promote and amplify, when we see people talking about on social when their issue arrives and taking pictures of it. And then as often as we can, we do, physically gather in some way. Susannah mentioned, New York and London as being the places where we have the most kind of nexus, but we've done it, in other cities as well. But just to promote the idea that this magazine is not just a publication that sometimes shows up. It's a network, it's a conversation, and there are a lot of exciting things going on in this group of people that you should be aware of. So, and in that way, it's not so much a sort of a timeline or an arrival. It's a cycle, and it keeps recurring, and the events that we do definitely build on themselves and reinforce that community. We're of course, there's as I think about the difference between our publication and yours, there are there's significant differences, but one thing that I'm a little envious of, I would say, is that your community is all right there. You are for the most part physically present in one one location, and that's a great opportunity to bring people together. to talk about an issue and for all the hard work you've done to make it pay off. And the way we think about doing that is, Pete was talking about the kind of the recognition or the contribution of your writers, and particularly, when you do manage to snag a well-known name, be that on campus or broader, we make the most of that. We invite that person to a physical event or an online event. It's very easy to do. Once someone has invested that kind of time into a piece, they're happy generally to just come on and talk about it, and that can help a lot to extend the conversation and the impact of your work to a much broader audience. So I think viewing your audience as a network, as an ongoing conversation, getting excited about the event of the arrival of this publication, and then building on that excitement and convening conversations in some way about the content after it's arrived is sort of the heart of what we do to promote the work that we're doing and to reach beyond our immediate circles, our immediate subscribers and followers. That's about what I wanted to say. And Drew, I'm really interested to hear how this comes across to an actual student journalist.
Yeah, this is a lot of good material. I've been taking notes to try and keep track of everything I want to say. The first thing that I'll note about the Apologia and the relationship that we have negotiated with our campus culture is that historically we often we have an existing network of Christian communities that we are ourselves involved in. And so we go to them first whenever we're ready to start thinking about our next issue. And we have our group chats. And so we go into those and we ask who wants to write. And we often follow whatever people are willing to write about because we're worried about getting enough contributors to make a full issue. And we often have a degree of attrition where we'll end up having maybe 12 people or 15 people send us pitches, and then for various reasons they end up deciding not to write, or they don't make it all the way through the process. So we usually end up having just enough final pieces to publish an issue. And I feel like there's a part of that that's also, once we start getting attrition, we focus on the pieces that we think will be strongest, and we put more of our attention as editors into working with those articles to make sure those writers don't drop off. But all of that is to say that since we're so focused on getting people to write in the first place, it has been a more recent maybe challenge for me and my generation of editors to think about what are the questions that people are asking and how can we figure those out, and then find a way to merge the interests that our writers have with the types of articles that might draw a broader readership. Because in every issue, we will end up publishing a mix of articles, which is, I think, actually, it's good for us because it can show a depth of engagement with culture, but also a depth of engagement with philosophical topics. But sometimes we lean a little bit too far into the realm of someone has some philosophical argument that they want to make that ends up producing a very impressive article, but not necessarily a very engaging article for a large audience. So I loved some of the things that you all said about connecting with people, and especially social media was one that we often forget about, because I think we just haven't had somebody who's been very interested in developing a social media account for the Apologia. So I realized, I think, Susannah, as you were talking, that social media can be something that each of our editors uses on our individual accounts, that we individually promote the publication and invite people to chat with us about it. But also, I think it was an important thing that I realized, that it takes dedication and commitment outside of our editorial meetings to find people who want to write articles, because it involves talking with the individuals in our lives, especially I think, Peter, what you were talking about of figuring out, conceptualizing issues and figuring out what people want to read, is that it can be important to go talk to all of my non-Christian friends. And sometimes I don't want to like, I often don't want to steer the conversation towards the Apologia, just for the sake of talking about what I'm involved in, because I don't always want to be in an feel like I'm in an evangelical conversation with my friends. But it was an important shift in my thinking that I got from hearing you speak, Peter, that I can frame the question more as, what are the kinds of things that you would be interested in reading? And what are the kinds of topics that would make you pick up a Christian apologetics journal, knowing full well what it is before you pick it up? Because at least at the Apologia, our target audience, the way we've talked about it, is the skeptic non-believer, someone who's interested in engaging with ideas, but is a skeptic. And so we just have to find the ideas that they're interested in engaging with. And Peter, I love that you mentioned the we as an enemy. And the way that I interpreted that was probing that we need to probe our assumptions about who we're speaking to, and how that affects the angle that we write an article from. But as we go into the Q&A, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about specific examples of that, because I can kind of wrap my head around it, but it's also a little bit more difficult to think about it in the abstract. And it might help if you had an example from an article that was written for Plough where you met that issue and then you had to find your way around it. The last thing that I'll say is that the Apologia has also just finished our fall issue, and we publish twice a year. So we got the physical proof from the printer and sent it back at the end of the weekend. So we're looking forward to having it in the next few days. I mean, we're having our celebration dinner tomorrow night for it, so I hope we have it in hand. But I'm also not the editor-in-chief anymore, so I'm not privy to all those conversations as information comes out. But distribution and getting our article in the hands of the people who we want to read it is a long-standing issue for us. It's a problem that we meet again at the end of every publication cycle, because we do put them in different spaces around campus, but then we think, well, are people actually picking them up, or are the janitors just throwing them in the trash if they sit on a common room table for too long? So I think social media and back to the individual accounts is another great opportunity to promote, and especially even getting our writers to promote it on their own accounts. But also doing events to talk about the issue has been a great thing in the past, but with all of us students dividing our time between working on the issues as well as just our regular classes, it can be difficult to think about it as an ongoing and repetitive cycle, because I think that might lead us to burn out a little bit more quickly, at least at the Apologia. So it has been maybe a little helpful for us in the past to think about doing one big event in the spring. That can be an opportunity for us to invite alums back to campus, but we can also use our forums organization we've just created, where we get speakers through Veritas and through the Thomistic Institute to come to campus, and combining guest lectures with students talking about their articles, I think has been a bit more of an effective way for us in past years to talk about or to promote our issues after publication. The issue is then just, have we lost our readers if that event happens 4 months after we publish an issue?
Really great comments and questions, Drew. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for providing your perspectives. I think we will move into a few questions from me now. Trevor, did you want to say something?
I thought I might just respond, to Drew's immediate question there about an event. We also think of events in terms of sort of their, particularly bigger events like what you're talking about, as sort of their own almost publication, right? Their own project, worth doing of their own right. And if you're, it doesn't surprise me to hear that you find it challenging to find time to kind of prepare for an event of that kind of scope. But if you can do it, even once, I think that's definitely worth doing, and worth it in its own right, even if it's not sort of directly tied to your last issue or your upcoming issue, whatever it is.
Um, for my first question, I would actually like to return to that question of burnout. So, Trevor, you were talking about lots of good ways to promote an issue once it's completed, once you have it in hand. You mentioned Cornell Claritas experience of maybe some burnout. You didn't use the word burnout, but you mentioned that they kind of thought, oh, okay, like, we're done working now once we finish the issue. I think that burnout is a pretty common experience among AC journals. We have small teams, they're all volunteers. They work really hard to get these pieces put together and designed and then sent off to a printer. And at the end of all of that, they do just kind of feel oftentimes frustrated with the process and definitely burned out, instead of feeling elated and excited to put on events and tell people, share about the articles and all this. So while I think that your ideas for promoting an issue at the end of all of that are great, I'm wondering if you have, any of you, thoughts on creating a really stable writing and editing process throughout the entire production cycle so that you can kind of sustain energy and then come to the finish line with that excitement to continue promoting it.
Well, I could perhaps jump in with a few thoughts. I mean, this is common in publishing across the board, right? So we literally just at 5 o'clock today signed off on the last piece for our next issue, which goes to the press tomorrow. So there's one very easy thing that I would recommend to everyone, which I've made the habit and learned from an editor when we started here 10 years ago. Just celebrate with your staff when the issue goes off. It's very simple and almost stupid. But we make sure that we get everyone who's been putting in that overtime for the last few weeks together, and we're gonna just take time to just be happy this thing went off. Another is, I guess, a little more from 30,000 feet, and it has to do with things that Trevor and Susannah were both saying. If we view our publication as a conversation from beginning to end, then instead of as this object that we push out into the world and then breathe a sigh of relief, it's done. I think that's really helpful. So if we can kind of get to the point where we're thinking, the issue itself and the articles we publish are important. We got to do them. But even in the process of thinking through who we publish in an issue, we're already thinking about the events. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of attitude to some degree. As you're putting an issue together, already start thinking who would be really fun to get together in person when this thing comes out, so that it's something that you look forward to instead of being one more task that you have to tick off, after you've already put all that work into the issue. And then my last thing is just really prosaic, and that is that we found that collaborative software, some of which is free, really, really helps cut down on that level of frustration. We use Asana. There's other things like that. Anything you can do to cut down the amount of emails, of frustration, of miscommunication, of two people editing the same piece, of authors feeling like the editing process is opaque, really, really helps. It is worth all the time you put into setting up some type of clearly defined system, including basically some sort of hierarchical editorial organization where you say, this part of the magazine is your thing, you do it, we trust you, we're behind you. Really kind of helps cut down on just the nerves that can otherwise be significantly frayed by the time that you're into the end of the thing. Basically, if I had to say even more bluntly like that, use email as little as possible. Try to find some collaborative software that you build your thing together on. It's not hard. This stuff is out there. It's for free. It's intuitive. It sounds stupid to say this, but we've just found that has been a huge key to just having everyone feeling a little more less frustrated and stressed at the end. Am I overstating that, Susannah?
No. That's, especially in your case, I think, Pete.
Yes.
But no, it structures your work so that you can like, when you are trying to remember, all right, where are we with this piece? I mean, Asana is just great. Maybe you should just try that. I don't really, there are other, you know, possibilities, but it's a way of kind of, when you're doing this kind of collaborative work, I don't know, I can't believe we used to do it on email. It just seems horrific. I'd sort of respond just by saying being read and having readers respond is itself energizing, at least in my experience. And so once you actually realize that people are reading the pieces that you worked so hard with the writers to, craft, and you're seeing your writers get excited by the responses that they are getting from readers, that itself gives you another kind of, that gives you a second wind for the whole issue. And you really sort of start to, like, that becomes the reward, like seeing the pieces land and seeing people get irritated about them or have something to say about them, and seeing your writers then respond to the readers, and like seeing, in some cases, like there will be people who will write whole pieces in response to pieces that we have, edited and put out there. And that, if there's anything that kind of gets through burnout, or like, oh, I'm so sick of this topic, or like, I thank God we're just done with this issue, like that just reminds you of what the whole point of all of this is, this is a conversation. And this is, think of this as, this is part of the creation mandate, not just crafting essays, but crafting a conversation on your campuses, like as a community, as the sort of promoting the common good of the community that is the campus, through these kinds of, wise and interesting conversations that are ultimately to God's glory. That conversation itself, as well as the product that is the magazine, is really what you should be thinking about, and what gets me excited, which is why I'm so hooked on Twitter. Just bad.
And just one thing, kind of another practical point, I think, all of you are experienced with the idea that, you need different skill sets among your staff, right? You need people who can edit, you need people who can design. And think about the people who may not be good at either, but are interested in the magazine and want to help promote it. And maybe there is a role for someone to be the person thinking about the social media and about what's going to happen next, so that that's kind of, I'm not that deeply involved in the editing of the magazine. And I don't have quite the same, I'm not quite in the same state of exhaustion at this point in the process that Pete is.
Look at Pete.
So, if there are people that that want to be involved and don't have a great capacity of editorial, maybe there is, a role for them in just thinking about the audience and sustaining a conversation and doing events and those kinds of things.
I'm curious, when you hear from your writers and you get feedback about whatever's been published in the magazine, where does that come to you? Like, how do you, through which channels? Is this word of mouth? Is this Twitter or a website mostly?
From our readers or from our writers?
Readers.
Okay. We have an email address that people sort of send random stuff to. There are Facebook comments. There's a lot of Twitter. I'd say those are, and then comments on the articles themselves.
And we do compile those like into one document, so that then we cherry pick from that for the reader's response section, and there's some back and forth with that individual. Yeah.
Peter, I think you're muted.
And whenever there is a response, we make sure to get it to the writer, because writers too want to know that they're not writing into the void.
Yeah.
And that is, again, the role of events, which we've brought up many times. But, if you think of the media environment that we live in, where people are just assailed by information and media offerings at all time, and we're competing not just with other magazines, but with everything else that people are using their time on. really what we can offer as magazines is those conversations. And
Mhm.
so that's why I do view events and in-person stuff, even very small get-togethers, as absolutely crucial in kind of keeping everyone invested, everyone excited, everyone reminded, this is our mission. This is why we're doing it. This is why it was worth, you spending a couple of weekends working on this piece.
Mhm.
Totally. I find that we get the most feedback through word of mouth. Um, People we know or people we talk to say, "Oh yeah, I picked up that issue," and "Oh yeah, I like this piece." We have an email address and invite people in every magazine to respond to articles by using that email address. But whenever we get an email, it is most often someone who is retired and has their own blog and says, "Here's what I thought about this article. You should check out my response to it on my blog," which is a little bit less relevant for us, and often a little bit the responses are a bit kooky.
We get those.
That too, yeah.
Great.
Shall we continue then? Great. Well, I think I would like to continue on the question of the topic of sort of readership and community. So a couple of questions around that. One is related to the we, which Peter was talking about. I would love to hear any of you, Peter especially, talk about the journal as a product and then the readers as a community, two kind of distinct things, and talk about how those two form each other, whether they inform each other. And then also on top of that, how writers, especially student writers, can be, we've touched on this quite a bit, but can really be thinking and learning about what the questions their readers are asking. So how can a writer then be formed by their readers in a good and healthy and fruitful way?
This may tie into, Drew, your question earlier about what it looks like to avoid that we actually in the process of editing. So I'll just throw out one example. I could give many, but it's one that I just was working on our last issue. We invited a Christian writer, a Baptist professor, to reflect on a pretty hot topic now, which is the fertility industry and surrogacy. So there's been this sort of ongoing debate. It's in some ways, you could say, from a Christian point of view, a bit of a nice issue because it's not as politically charged yet as some other sort of stuff that might get written off as culture war. So you can talk about issues of surrogacy, for instance, in terms of the impact on women, the economic rights, economic exploitation, things that people of goodwill should care about, whether or not they've signed on to the full list of, Christian ethical concerns. And so this writer wrote a piece that was really good, very solid, well crafted. Susannah worked on it as well. But there was one tweak that our editorial team made that I thought was super important. And we'll see how the piece actually plays when it runs, which was to not start with the objections, the scary stuff, whoa, we should watch out for the fertility industry and the surrogacy industry and what it's doing to women in India, which he definitely should get into, but rather start by affirming what is the good that people who are in this situation and dealing with this or advocating it for personally or advocating it for others are trying to pursue, which is the good of children, which is something we can affirm. So it's a move that actually my fellow editor, Katherine Kuiper, who is involved with Veritas as well, likes to attribute to one of her professors, Leon Cass. So start, in terms of framing particularly controversial issues, start by framing the good that people on both sides, including apparent opponents of what we may feel is the Christian truth of the matter, are trying to pursue, and taking that, affirming that, taking it in good faith, assuming that they are advocating for those things in good faith, and then show how certain responses, certain moves in society are actually a false answer. And then you can get into, without pulling any punches, you have started by affirming common ground. To your question, Mariah, of how does the magazine's identity kind of coincide with the reader's identity, and how those things kind of cohere, I feel that's a constant kind of creative tension. Every magazine needs to know what it stands for. There has to be certain lines that you know up front that you won't cross. There has to be certain things that you know that you're going to be behind. If you don't have that, you don't have an identity as a magazine. That said, there may be some issues that you conclude is just not prudent or wise for your particular magazine with your particular stable of writers to address, where the conversation that you would start would not be one that would be fruitful for anybody involved. And always bear in mind that we, right, who is being excluded from the we, basically. And there are times when people simply will feel excluded from issues that you take, stances that you take, and that's fine, that's life. But at least make the attempt to imagine what is the good that the people that we disagree with are trying to pursue. Another issue you might take might be euthanasia. Medical assistance in dying is a huge issue right now. It's hitting a bunch of secular papers. There's a lot of concern about how those who are mentally ill or disabled or simply just poor might be being pushed into seeking medical assistance in dying in places, for instance, like Canada. But start out first with asking, well, what is it that the advocates of these things see as the good they're trying to pursue? Mm-hmm. Start off by affirming those good things, and then you can get into unpacking why certain answers that our secular culture may offer to these things are actually maybe deeply damaging to the most vulnerable. And I think that way of thinking about issues is really helpful. I do know that there are certain things that our readership will just love, and you got to do some of those too every now and again, right? Just make them part of your mix. Have fun. I think fun is underrated as a part of publishing. So if you know that your readership is just going to go crazy over, something on, Les Miserables or,
Dinotopia.
Dinotopia, or, the Amazon's new Tolkien films or something, like, just lean into it. Just have fun. You give yourself permission to have fun sometimes.
Yeah. In terms of, just sort of trying to figure out what it is that people, this is sort of aiming at Mariah's question before, where to find that conversation, like what people are talking about, and how to sort of decide what it is that you want to cover. Obviously, this is going to look very different on a campus than it does, for us. But one of the things that I found it helpful to sort of think about just in general is, like, what are people talking about publicly? What are people talking about privately? What do they feel can't be said in different sort of sets of among different categories of people? What is said only combatively and sort of like angrily with no analysis? And so it's very emotional and it just feels culture war, but there's no like calm philosophical analysis. And then what's said only intellectually without any emotion or story behind it, and try and figure out like where are the holes, like what's not being covered, because you don't want to necessarily write yet another impassioned piece about, I mean, maybe you probably do in many cases write yet another impassioned piece about abortion or something. But maybe if there is, if a topic has been of great emotional impact on campus, you could approach it from a more analytical and kind of calm perspective. Or if a topic has been like if there's something that's like you feel like is being too intellectualized, can you bring someone's story in, and kind of be a little bit more emotional or a little bit more impassioned to kind of put some flesh on that. Those are just kind of, it's like almost a heuristic device to like figure out what are the topics, like what are the things that we should be talking about, what are the things that we should be asking our writers to write about, if you do want to move from, as you said, that just like what are people pitching us, to can we ask people to write specific pieces and find the right people to write those pieces.
If I could jump in, Susannah, I love some of those questions that you just asked. And I think that's something that the Apologia could definitely use as we're thinking about our next issue. But also what you were saying gave me an idea, and I would love to hear in the chat if there are any AC student journals or AC journals that have done this. But since we have a campus space and we have central locations, I wonder if it would be fruitful to set up a table. And I often see other clubs setting up a table in some space in the library, and they're trying to promote something. But I wonder if we could set up a table with a big banner that just has a question on it, as a way to try and invite people to come talk to us, to get the people that we don't know to tell us, what are the issues that you think are only discussed combatively or only discussed without emotion. Yeah, so I'd love to hear in the chat if any journals have done that, because I'm starting to think that might be a nice idea.
Or what about an anonymous question box? Like have a box with index cards and just invite students to come up and like don't show, they're never going to put their names on it. This is really probably a terrible idea. This is like already a trash fire. Probably don't do this. But just like write down what they would like to see, what piece they would like to read in the next issue, or what question they have about Christianity or about culture or about life on campus. And then stick it in the box, and then, put on some sunglasses and like have a flamethrower nearby when you read them.
Right. No, I think that would be great. I think that the biggest trick for that is figuring out what question do you write on that banner that gets people to walk up to the table and actually write something down.
I will say one AC team did something similar to this. They did an anonymous survey in the spring asking their campus what questions they're asking, which works too. We are running short on time, but we do have a couple of questions, so I want to try to hit one of those at least. I think Victor Tyne, if he's still here, we will have him come up to ask his question. Victor, are you there?
Hi, yes.
Hey, go for it.
Yeah, so Drew was talking earlier a bit about kind of the difficulty of getting issues into people's hands, and then also the uncertainty of knowing if you are doing that. And you kind of addressed the first part of that question. I was wondering if you have any tips as to the second part, like determining to what extent you're having an impact and actually reaching people.
Great question, Victor. So I was, when you put that in the Q&A, I was thinking, we kind of two parts to that. One is that on the one hand, for us, the magazine is in a certain sense of business, and there's things we're measuring, and is what we're doing working. We have to be sure that what we're doing is worthwhile. So yeah, we regularly review things like, for us, it's the number of paid subscribers, the number of website views, the number of visits coming from email, the number of followers and click-throughs from social media. So there's a whole list of metrics that we kind of review pretty regularly and see what's working and what's not. So that's very intentional. We decide what matters, how can we measure it, and we make a point of doing that. It's one of the things in business is that what's measured improves. So if you're thinking about Now, what the kind of comparable measurements would be for you, I'm not sure, but it does pay to think about what matters, what outcomes matter to you, and how can we get a sense of that, and maybe there's things like surveys and things like that. But then, you know, the most kind of exciting or validating experiences are when you hear in conversation, like you hear the story about how someone discovered your journal, or the impact that a particular article made on someone's life. That, you know, we celebrate and kind of highlight those experiences and those encounters, those words, because they tell us what it is we're really about, and you know, the change that we really want to make in people's lives. So, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure how you know, a student journal could make those measurements, but I think if you sort of think about ways that you could sort of take those readings, that could be very worthwhile. Certainly has.
Yeah, I think I like the survey idea at a student level. I think since we have like access to email all of campus as a like campus recognized student organization, that's something that we haven't taken advantage of at Dartmouth, but we totally should. Because other than that, like, I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know how many people, like, even like, if we could figure out how many people pick up an issue, I don't know how many of those people actually end up reading the whole thing.
Here's one other idea, Drew, which we've done sometimes, but which our friends at a non-Christian publication, The Point magazine, out of Chicago and New York does, which is when they publish an article they're really proud of that they thought that people should engage with, go to 5 people and commission responses, short responses, 200 words, and include those in your next issue or push them out some other way by email or whatever. Number one, you guarantee some feedback to you, but you also give that piece a second life, and a second chance to be in the conversation. So that's something we've done occasionally. We've also done it around articles we didn't publish, but that we thought were a good fit with our mission. So let's talk about, you know, this big piece on Christian nationalism that just come out, or whatever the topic might be that you think would kind of touch the right buttons, academic freedom, freedom of speech, deplatforming, or whatever, and get a bunch of people to weigh in. And then, you know, you've given something a second life and you've gotten feedback, and it's sort of both and.
I like that.
Do we have time for one more, or do we want to wrap up? Yeah.
Let's do one more. Yeah, that'd be great.
Let's do one more.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us,
Peter
Victor.
Biles. Peter Biles, if he is still here.
1 minute. Here we go. Peter.
Yeah, thank you again, Victor, for the question.
Hey, Peter.
Hey, Peter.
Hello. Good to see you. Yeah, so too many years on this call. My question, and I think Peter Mommsen, you kind of spoke this a little bit, but just this issue of, you know, how do you know your audience well, or who generally reads what the magazine is putting out, but also maybe retaining that audience, but also speaking in new ways that might complicate the issues that this audience is used to engaging with, as a way to broaden the scope of what you're trying to say. I don't know if that makes sense, but I think I mean, you mentioned the culture war issue of just how do we avoid, like, student journalists writing from a Christian perspective of just writing things that are the same, like I guess that people just automatically agree with, or it's just sort of like automatically affirmed by the audience, but not really, maybe the issue is not complicated, or sorry, I'm kind of going on, but I don't know if that makes sense. anyone's welcome to speak to that, but yeah.
So maybe how do we keep arguments from being too insular, or how do we complicate them in the right ways?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very well said.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Susannah.
I mean, part of that would just be kind of the normal kind of argumentative discipline of steel manning whatever the contrary position is, which is not that different than what Peter described as Catherine's professor Leon Cass's approach to like what is the good that the other side is seeking. But just do your best to steel man, like the opposite of a straw man is a steel man. So like do your best to like make the strongest possible case for the opposing position. And get worried about your own position. And then really try to find out what would feel threatening to you, and then find out a way to think about that in a way that's like less pat or less Hallmark cardy or less obvious. I don't know. There's a certain amount of repetitiveness about like I've been pretty deep in the pro-life movement for a pretty long time, and there's a certain amount of repetitiveness, but at the same time, I don't know, it hasn't been a huge issue for me, just because like you're always reaching someone else's new mind as well. Like that's the other thing, especially at your guys' age. Like don't be jaded about another think piece already. Like there's a lot more that there is to find out. I don't know. That was also fairly coherent. Sorry. It's almost 1 a.m.
Yeah. You're doing great, Susannah. I'm, as the marketing guy, I kind of sit on the sidelines of editorial discussions, and one thing I notice is kind of an allergy for allowing someone to say the expected or usual thing. You know, if we're going to get someone with a big name or recognized name in a certain space, we try to get them to say something surprising or a topic that they don't usually address, or it's basically just sort of not allowing the usual thing to be said or argued about. That's just what came to mind when you asked your question, Peter.
Get Rowan Williams to talk about his plays that he's written, for example, which is our piece from today.
Yeah, and I'll just add briefly to that. Consider getting someone who's conventionally viewed as an opponent to concede some ground that is important. So somebody who's been a bugbear in Christian and disabilities rights circles for decades now is the philosopher Peter Singer at Princeton, who is infamous, depending on how you want to go at it, for defending, for instance, infanticide of infants who have disabilities. Consider getting people like that to talk about something that you do agree with. For instance, in his case, the background of his family and surviving the Holocaust, and his concern that people who can be helped, he's this utilitarian philosopher. What does utilitarianism, how can it challenge Christians to be more faithful to the gospel in their care for the poor? I think it's often looking for like those angles where you can do a little bit of jujitsu on those topics that people eyes glaze over and say, of course the Christians would say that. Well, try to use your opponent's force against them, and find some surprising points of confluence. And that's not always what you want to do. I do think Susannah's point is right, that the truth is we're saying many different ways, many different times, because there's always people who are getting it for the first time. And yet the great thing about a magazine, and let's remember the etymology of the magazine, right? It's a storehouse for weapons. And you can have many different kinds of weapons, and you can combine reaffirmations of the truth that we as Christians know to be true, with some other things that probe more deeply and maybe cast a fresher light on the same issues, but from an angle that people wouldn't expect. And that's the fun part of journalism.
One other thing I'll quickly add on the insularity piece, the side of the question, is getting our writers to think about who is expected or who we want to read their piece, which, at least for the Apologia, is we are often writing to non-Christians, that skeptic non-believer that I talked about earlier. And so it becomes important to avoid using in-house or insular language to remind the author that they're not writing to a primarily Christian audience. And maybe the situation is a little bit different for Plough, but so like a practical example of this is we had one writer in our last issue use the language believer when they were talking about Christians. And that's fine when we're in a room and we're all Christians and we agree that we believe in the truth and the good. But when we're targeting non-Christian audience, I think that kind of language can come across a little bit more jarring.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Ooh, Mariah, where'd you go?
That was my fault. Let me make sure we get her back on.
You're supposed to kick me off, Trevor.
Yeah, kick the wrong person off. Sorry about that.
Well, hopefully we answered your question, Peter.
No,
And
definitely.
if
Yeah,
not,
thank
you can hit us up on Twitter, because you, in fact, are on social media.
Yes, absolutely.
There we go. Thanks, Peter.
I mean, I'll just take, while we're waiting for Mariah, I'll just take a kind of page out of one of my mentors' books, this Robbie George's Princeton. And, that is that if we really believe what we're about, won't be scared of seeking the truth wherever it leads, with whomever is also out of good faith seeking the truth. And I think that kind of confidence in how we speak, our confidence in not shying back from difficult conversations with those with whom we may disagree, has to do, at the editing level, as Drew was just saying, with avoiding insular or jargony language, with language that kind of signals us versus you guys out there. But it also just kind of suffuses your whole editorial enterprise. That, we're comfortable seeking the truth and also having our own minds changed, or at least seeing aspects of the truth that we didn't walk into the room with. And I think if folks feel that from a magazine, if that is the way a conversation is conducted, sort of Socrates in the best sense, that in itself has a kind of attractive power, a welcoming power. And that's what we aspire to in Plough as well. We don't always get it right, and that's also okay, but we keep on trying.
Yeah.
Well, this has been really a great conversation, and thanks to all the attendees for joining tonight, and for Peter and Victor joining us with your questions. Before we wrap up here, I just wanted to mention, actually, Peter Biles was just on, was one of our first interns at Plough, 4 or 5 years ago. So for some years now, we've been offering a summer internship, and we would love to have any of you here on the call apply for that. I'm going to drop a link in the chat if you're interested. Not only you'll get to work alongside our team here, but as well as that, you'll live in intentional Christian community here at the Bruderhof at Fox Hill in upstate New York. And we've had for several summers now, we've had 8 or 9 people, students, for a month at a time. It's been a really great experience for everyone, and there, friendships formed that continue well into the future. So we'd love to have you check that out. If that's something that interests you, please apply. We'll can also shoot this link around tomorrow, and just to say it's a very worthwhile experience. Yeah, thanks, Peter Biles, for chipping in. Yeah, love to see some of you here this coming summer, or if you are interested in bringing your student journal for a visit, if you're within visiting distance of New York. We've done that a couple of times, and we would love to see you here in any capacity.
Thanks, Trevor, and thanks to all of our panelists for spending time with us tonight. This was a fun time for me, and I know it was a valuable and thought-provoking time for KC students. As Peter Blair, one of many Peters with us this evening, has just put in the chat, yes, you should do the Plough internship and then join us at Veritas Institute in Washington, D.C., which will take place the first full week of June. So it's the 5th through the 10th of June. Like Peter mentioned earlier, the theme this upcoming summer will be, is there such a thing as the good life? We will be opening the application next month, but if you are already interested, please go ahead and email us at augustine@veritas.org to be placed on that priority list. It'll grant you early access to the application. I think that's it from us.